It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Last week was interesting. Welcome back. Last week was interesting. The Democrat Party, their ideals. Well, last week, let me just say, I came to the conclusion it's going to be a lot of fun watching these the Democrats try to outflank each other on the left. Who's got the more radical plan? I think it's going to be fun to watch this as a conservative myself. So, for example, when Bernie Sanders says that you have felons that need to be able to vote, and to watch even the leftist media squirm, they're like, ugh. Bernie's trying to out-socialist the socialist mainstream media. Front page of Breitbart.com this morning, 15 serial killers, rapists, kidnappers, child molesters eligible to vote under Bernie Sanders' plan. It's pretty sick when you think about it. Here now to talk more about this, I want to introduce Gary S. Goldman. He's a nationally recognized host of Business, Politics, and Lifestyles, a weekly talk show airing on WCRN 830 in Metro Boston, Massachusetts. Gary, welcome to Conduit News. How are you this morning?
Paul, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. What was your reaction to last week when Bernie Sanders not once but twice even doubled down on felons getting the right to vote?
Well, here's my position as a believer in democracy and a person that truly cares about the victims, which I think Bernie Sanders and a lot of those on the left, and I think you brought up a great point. It's going to be an interesting campaign with each one trying to outdo the other. They jump on their bandwagon, then they try to figure out how to get off. But, he talked about the Boston Marathon bomb or something dear to our heart living here in Massachusetts. So my feeling is when you're arrested and you're charged with the crime and you go to jail and you put on the orange jumpsuit and they hand you that little bag where you put your belongings in, once you dump your belongings in your bag, that your right to vote is gone. Nothing until you leave prison and you stick your hand. If you leave prison, depending on the crime, and you stick your hand back in to pick up your belongings. So I think Bernie is really outdoing himself here, and we joke about it and we laugh about it, but when you think about it, no care about the victims and their families. You never hear the left talking about the victim or the family. It's always the poor guy or the poor woman who committed the crime, and what can we do to help them? And I think the American people are going to see right through this, Paul.
I think you're right. On its face, especially if you're talking about, violent felons, they in many cases, they've taken something from somebody else or their very lives, and they've taken the right to vote permanently from people that they've killed, and now we're going to somehow say that they need the right to vote for candidates and have an impact on where our society goes from here. It just sounds preposterous.
It is preposterous. Look at the shooter this weekend in San Diego at the synagogue. So he would have the right to vote, and the victim that was killed, she doesn't have a right. She's done.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is preposterous. And look at Bernie. Bernie loves. If you study Bernie Sanders, and I've done, I do more and more reading because there's a part of me that thinks that he's going to be the nominee this year or next year for the Democrats. But this has been his modus of operandi his whole life. This is what what he's been touting. He just has the stage right now. He has an audience on the left that is listening to him more than ever, and he has some people that have entered the House this year that are sympathetic to his cause. So I think he's been more apt to throw some of his wilder ideas out there, and this is just one that I think most Americans do not agree with.
I completely agree. I'm glad that you're saying, hey, we need to be cautious. We don't. It is funny, but we need to take it seriously, because honestly, there are a lot of young people. You mentioned people coming to the House. That's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That for some reason, Gary, they think socialism's the way to go. I mean, you've got the word business in the name of your show. Socialism and business, they don't go well together.
And as horrific as it is, Venezuela couldn't have happened at a better time for the American people to really see the contrast of what has happened in Venezuela and what's going on now and where they want to take the United States of America. a lot of the people that you're talking about, that younger generation, haven't spent the time to really understand what a wealthy country Venezuela really was, and look at where it is now. And people like Sanders and Alexandria there, that's their motive. That's where they want to take America. Why? I'm not sure. They talk about that 1% or the 2% that are going to pay for this to make it less of a burden on the rest of us. That 2% runs out awfully quickly, and it falls right back on the middle class taxpayer like it always has. So,
it really does.
It's a myth. The whole thing is a myth, and it's just how they present the narrative. And unfortunately, there are those out there that do listen.
One of the things that has frustrated me is this whole. I know we're kind of leaping off a point here, but
Yeah.
with the whole climate change narrative, not that we can look at this scientist or that scientist or whatever. But for them to definitively come out, and it's not just Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but it's other people saying that we only have 12 years left. I would hope that there are people who can think a little critically out there and say, really? 12 years? How did we arrive at that specific number?
They don't even know. And where does that 12 years start? That time start clicking. Every time you listen to them, it starts clicking on the day they bring up a new issue. So if 12 years is the number, according to Alexandria, then her new Green Deal is a myth, because that's going to take 10 years to implement. So we're going to have a net gain of 2 years. That doesn't really make any sense. And secondly, they talk about building, and we should be using more wood as opposed to other, things when we're building now. That's one of their new narratives. Well, to use wood, we have to cut down trees, and I thought they were against cutting trees down and utilizing those sorts of resources. Look, is there a problem? Are there issues with the climate that we should all be concerned about? Of course. I just don't buy that it affects everything from the Taliban to the food chain to the way we conduct our lives on a daily basis. And that's the problem. It's one extreme to the other, and people have a hard time wrapping their arms around it.
We're talking with Gary S. Goldman. He's a nationally recognized host of Business, Politics, and Lifestyles at WCRN 830 in Metro Boston, Massachusetts. And Gary, I have to ask you, you're broadcasting in a very blue state up there. How is your message received?
Well, obviously I have a lot of listeners that do not agree with what I have to say, and that's okay. We love to get their opinion and talk to them. But look, there are I have a lot of friends that are very liberal and to the left, but they're getting concerned with the left movement. And they're, let's take the border, this bit, there's nothing to worry about on the border, when in fact we know we have serious problems. So there are people, they're the Boston and Cambridge liberals that you're never going to change. But I will say there are a number of people out there that are open-minded, that are starting to see through some of the rhetoric that they're hearing from those on the left, that, like you're saying, with the climate and everything else, the world isn't falling down. Let's figure a way to talk about it. But we're outnumbered, and it's very difficult at times. It's I always tell my callers, you're entitled to your opinion when you call, but your facts better be straight. And what I find is, as soon as I get into a conversation to try to have dialogue, I call dialogue a conversation back and forth. Those that disagree with me, you call dialogue yelling at me, thinking yelling is going to get their point across. I'm sure you've seen that. But, it's just a matter of spewing the facts, telling them the facts, and telling people that don't believe everything that you hear on the mainstream media. Look it up yourself. Because you read it on Facebook doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean it's true. So, look, it's always going to be a battle in this state from that regard. But there are those that are realistic.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're saying that there are those that are realistic. For example, if you are, just kind of somebody who's willing to listen or observe what the reality of what's actually going on versus what we're told the reality is. The idea of freedom of speech. This used to be something that was, it's just something you didn't mess with. We understood that you had the right to freedom of speech, but now we have the left going out there saying, like you say, they just want to yell over you in many cases. They want to silence the opposition instead of engaging in the debate. They want to have safe spaces. And for the life of me, you would think, this traditional concept, whether you're on the left or the right, the idea of freedom of speech is a very American concept, and it's got to be protected.
And they want to redefine freedom of speech on a daily basis to fit whatever point they're trying to make. So if you get into a conversation, you have, regarding anything, and they don't like what they're hearing, they want to redefine what freedom of speech really amounts to. So they don't want me saying certain things, or they don't want me wearing a Trump hat, or or a red hat in particular. They just redefine it to fit what they're trying to do, and that is I tell people all the time, we do not want to go down that road because it's just going to lead to chaos and anarchy. Freedom of speech is a very valuable thing to the American people, and most of us know what it really means. Sometimes we have to redefine and look at it again, but we can't redefine it in the terms that the left wants to redefine it because they're not getting their own way. It reminds me of little spoiled children. You don't get your own way, let's change the rules of the game here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to change the rules of the game: freedom of speech, electoral college, voting rights. This brings us back to having felons vote, Gary. I mean, can we speculate that if Bernie Sanders got his way and all these felons started voting, I mean, come on. I think most of these felons are going to vote for Democrats.
Well, that's what most of this amounts to, anyways. Whether it's this or the border issue, they're looking for votes. They've run out of voters. Their only source of new voters are those that they can manipulate with some sort of benefit or monetary benefit. And when you look at the success of the economy, whether they want to admit it or not, Hispanics and blacks are doing very well, and they're concerned about that voting element of the population. So now let's get they'll do whatever they can to increase their side.
Yeah.
But the felons, come on, let's all stop and take a deep breath and think about this. I mean, totally unrealistic, totally against what this country was all about and made of.
Gary S. Goldman, it's a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to meet you.
My pleasure. Look forward to speaking again soon.
Absolutely. Gary S. Goldman, again, nationally recognized host, business, politics, and lifestyles. It's a weekly talk show airing on WCRN 830 in Boston, Massachusetts.